covered thus far have ranged from the impact of geopolitics on tourism and most recently, tourism resilience and COVID-19. On February 17th, 2023, the GTR CMC and our partners will launch our Tourism Resilience Day as at our global conference on tourism resilience for sustainable development in Kingston, Jamaica. Tourism resilience represents an important day for us to both mark and remind us of the importance of tourism resilience for global sustainability. Today, however, we focus our efforts on resilience and disaster risk reduction for tourism sustainability, a topic that is very critical, especially now. While the global tourism industry has been traditionally recognized and described by many as resilient on account of its ability to demonstrate its capacity to bounce back quickly from shocks, as history has clearly indicated, increasingly we have come to realize that disruptive forces threaten the sustainability of global tourism worldwide. We have seen sporadic and a wide range of natural disasters that have significantly impacted climate change. These have ranged from floods that we're now seeing in many parts of the world, typhoons that many countries are experiencing, both Jamaica and Japan both experienced a recent scare with the possibility of a typhoon. Fortunately, in both instances, countries were spared and thus lives were spared. But today we examine some of these issues. But before we begin the program, the official program that is, I would like to invite Jamaica's ambassador to Japan, Ambassador Richards, who has been a quarterback behind this particular event. She and her team have both significantly contributed to us being able to host this event and as well as facilitating the GTR CMC in Japan. Ambassador, I'll be the first to say thank you for your hard work, and it's been a pleasure working with you. Ambassador?
And Risk Governance with the United Nations Development Program, and Mr. Taro Morishima, General Manager of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan, and other members of the club. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, again, ohayou gozaimasu, good morning from here in Tokyo, Japan. I am delighted to warmly welcome all our participants, including our audience here at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan, which is one of the world's oldest and most prestigious press club. I also warmly welcome our online participants in the Caribbean, Europe, and elsewhere in the world. Thank you all for joining us. Today's seminar is quite timely for three main reasons. First, it comes on the heels of the Tourism Expo Japan 2022, which over the past 4 days encouraged us to restart as we take on the new challenges of a new era in tourism. For the second reason, the weather events of the past week in Japan and Jamaica are reminders of the continued impact of natural disasters, whether sudden or cyclical, on our tourism industry. The third and final reason is that building resilience is an iterative process, one which requires us to constantly transform our experiences and lessons into concrete, adaptive measures. It is precisely for this reason that the GTR CMC was established at the University of the West Indies in 2018, and the Embassy is therefore pleased to partner with the Center to organize this seminar under its Ed Bartlett lecture series. Ladies and gentlemen, in March 2015, the international community adopted the Sendai framework, and with its adoption, we pledged to further integrate resilience and disaster risk reduction in all areas of global and national development. Fast forward to March 2020, where the world's resilience was put to a severe test after the novel coronavirus was declared a pandemic. Since that time, the world has experienced prolonged and unimagined disruptions to the system and supply chains to which we have been accustomed. While all aspects of social and economic life were impacted by the global pandemic, the tourism industry took a significant hit. Indeed, COVID-19 added itself to a list of challenges to the tourism industry, including the other C, climate change, and its attendant environmental impacts. In what was dubbed tourism's worst year in history, 2020 saw a 74% drop in international arrivals. Greater still was the impact of the pandemic on the Caribbean, a region that has been ranked globally as the most tourism-dependent region, with 34 to 48% of GDP coming from tourism. Within these statistics, we can recognize how much of an existential threat COVID-19 posed to our tourism ecosystem. Across the Caribbean, while we dealt with the public health side of the pandemic with relative success, our new economic realities affected our ability to respond to COVID-19's far-reaching impacts. Guided by scientific evidence and data-driven decision-making, Jamaica swiftly moved to reopen its borders in June 2020 to mitigate the negative economic and social effects of the pandemic. Thanks to strict protocols and measures that we have developed for all segments of the tourist industry, Jamaica has been able to recover with relative success. But while these have served us well in the short term, how can we achieve long-term recovery that effectively address our social, our economic, and environmental challenges? How do we ensure that future society can withstand disruptions like those brought on by COVID-19, or just about any other external shock that might present itself, be it economic, technological, or environmental? As we seek to put the worst of the pandemic behind us, sustainability, resilience, innovation, and digital transformation have emerged as key features of the discourse on recovery. While the Sendai framework calls on us to build back better, we must now not only build back better, but also stronger. Today, the Honorable Edmund Bartlett, Jamaica's Minister of Tourism, and a distinguished panel of experts will offer their perspectives on how we can leverage resilience building and disaster risk reduction to future-proof our tourism ecosystem. Minister Bartlett has been a strong global champion for global tourism resilience, and the panel boasts thought leaders and practitioners in the fields of tourism and disaster risk management. Together, they will contribute to enriching action-oriented dialogue towards resilience in the sector. I thank you once again for joining us, and I look forward to fruitful discussions during today's seminar. Domo arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. In 2018, Jamaica hosted a global conference on tourism and jobs. One of the calls from that conference, from the stakeholders there, was the need for a center or a body or an entity to focus specifically on tourism resilience for sustainable development. Resilience in and of itself was emerging as an important concept in the development lexicon. And as a result of that, there needed to be a focus on tourism and tourism resilience. So, Minister Bartlett had an idea of establishing a center. He met with the Vice Chancellor for the University of West Indies, Sir Hilary Beckles, and that was in 2019. In 2022, today, I can report that we've established 6 centers, some of which are fully operational and others are moving in that particular direction. We have undertaken over 23 projects worldwide, many of which have been just bringing persons together, looking at the challenges that destinations face and solutions to those challenges, and just bringing them together. We provided technical assistance to 18 countries and have influenced policy worldwide through 15 high-level task force and committees. That is just to say that the center, though established in 2019, in a very, very short period of time and during a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, was able to mushroom and easily respond to the challenges that emerged during COVID, because one of the thematic areas for the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center in 2018 was actually dealing with pandemics. And Minister Bartlett had the foresight to recognize that this would have been a possibly emerging challenge given the history of the tourism space and other epidemics that have emerged in the last decade. And for that, I can personally say we really thank the Minister for the foresight and the vision to establish such a creature that is well needed now in a space that, which is a tourism space, which we've now recognized since COVID, directly impacts on the development of countries, both industrializing countries and industrialized countries. So Minister Bartlett, on behalf of those of us who work for the center, thank you. We know that you're far away from the country in Japan, but we are looking forward to your remarks. So I think that was your introduction, sir.
Thank you for that very unusual and special introduction. Distinguished partners all across the world who are tuned into this lecture series today. It is indeed, I think, a momentous period in our development as a human family, as we are attempting to recover stronger, better, and more resilient from perhaps the most existential threat that Anthropocene Earth has experienced. So whilst we recognize tourism over the years as being a very resilient economic activity, its vulnerabilities are equally well known. And so today's lecture will seek to look beyond what we have known and to focus a little bit on what we need to know to ensure that this great industry continues to be the driver of economic recovery globally, but in a more inclusive way, and one which enables the resilience to express itself fully in sustainability of a sector, and indeed a species in the end that is vital to the world. So while the global tourism industry, I think, has been traditionally described as resilient on account of its demonstrable capacity to recover quickly from past shocks, the industry is equally vulnerable to cyclical shocks of various types. Increasingly, the disruptive forces threatening the sustainability of the global tourism industry have become more sporadic and wide-ranging. They include natural disasters, climate change impacts, epidemics and pandemics, cybercrimes, political instability, terrorism, wars, and economic crises. Indeed, the ongoing pandemic over the past 2 years has tested the presumed resilience of the tourism industry more than any previous disruptive event in modern history. It has forced all destinations, irrespective of size, location, and attributes, into indefinite survival mode. It has presented challenges that national, regional, and global stakeholders have been unable to respond to with only degrees of confidence or certainty that have characterized them in the past. It has also heightened consciousness that the global tourism sector can no longer be taken off guard by disruptive events as it prepares for a future of more uncertainties. Instead, the whole industry is called upon to adopt a methodological, collaborative, and institutional approach towards resilience building. Indeed, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, the attitude towards resilience building among stakeholders of tourism can no longer be discretionary. Resilience building has to become the most important catalyst of the survival and the competitiveness of the post-COVID-19 global travel and the tourism industry. Since the pandemic started, many destinations have unveiled a number of action-oriented measures to drive the recovery of the tourism sector. There has been a frantic exploration of innovation, synergies, and creativity to ensure that destinations remain open for business in a safe and healthy environment. There has been unprecedented attention paid to processes, standards, measurements, and responsible patterns of behavior by all involved in the value chain to ensure that the sector meets the demands for the delivery of a more sustainable tourism product, one indeed that balances economic, social, environmental, and human interests. Overall, therefore, as an unavoidable consequence of the pandemic, stakeholders have also been forced to contemplate more profoundly the current challenges and future needs of the tourism industry and how we can respond in a decisive manner. Years of accumulated wisdom have also indicated that travelers' perceptions of destination attractiveness and security can be easily impacted by even minor disruptive events, let alone major ones. Climate change in particular, and its consequences, such as extreme climatic conditions, sea level rise, and biodiversity loss, has been singled out as the most urgent threat to both marine-based and land-based tourism, with small island destinations, such as those belonging to us in the Caribbean, and I speak as a Caribbean man at this moment, considered, of course, to be among the really specially vulnerable. Given, therefore, the context provided, disaster risk management, I think, plays a crucial role in the sustainability of competitive tourism ecosystems. The process enables destinations to address disaster risks that may develop in the future based on current and past experiences and the lessons learned. It measures the readiness of destinations to manage disaster risk along 4 key dimensions. 1, hazard awareness. 2, exposure. And 3, vulnerability and capacity. At the recent expo, at the round table, ministerial round table, made the call, a call which I think has resonance, for a fund to be established, a tourism global resilience fund, in order to respond to some of these 4 points that I've just enumerated. I hope that that will take on some legs from this most resilient country in the world, Japan, and resonates across the world with positive responses. Ultimately, taking account of these 4 elements of disaster risk management will enable destinations to better map and reduce disaster risk and ensure tourism sustainability. Thus, as an urgent requirement, major stakeholders of the global tourism industry must now give a higher level of prioritization to disaster risk management in the designing and implementation of their business models and long-term growth strategies. Crisis or risk management, however, must be approached as a cycle or as a process with many complementary overlapping components, several stages and levels of input and progression. Different agencies, groups, and stakeholders must all be working collaboratively and symmetrically across sectors based on shared goals and objectives. And this constancy of monitoring and evaluation of systems, processes, and outcomes, and indeed reinventing and rethinking of strategies and approaches, must then provide the basis for evolving considerations and capabilities. The importance of rethinking how we approach tourism is underscored, I think, by the United Nations World Tourism Organization's theme for World Tourism Day, which is being observed on September 27 under the theme Rethinking Tourism. According to the UNWTO, this means putting people and planet first and bringing everyone from government and businesses to the local communities. And the local communities are so important in this, all together around a shared vision for a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient sector. This year's World Tourism Day theme will also guide Jamaica's activities for Tourism Awareness Week, which runs from September 25 to October 1, as we continue to raise awareness of the importance of tourism and its social, cultural, political, and economic value. With this in mind, as we rethink our approach to tourism within the context of resilience building, it must be underscored that a critical facet of crisis or risk management is being proactive, anticipating, planning, and innovating to prevent disruptive events from happening, or being able to mitigate their impact when they happen, instead of constantly being taken off guard. An effective crisis or risk management framework aims to build the capacity of destinations to anticipate and respond to threats through institution building, formulation of standards for vulnerability assessment and risk mapping, identifying best practices, and adapting lessons learned from previous crises. Likewise, providing safety nets to absorb risks through the establishment of various financial and insurance models, emphasizing and incentivizing corporate social responsibility as an ethos underpinning the tourism sector, harnessing and ensuring that the transformative capacities of technology are brought into play, strengthening also the regulatory framework through public policy and the enforcement of policies and practices, as well as the harmonization and standardization of disaster preparedness and hazard management systems. All these are critical elements that have to be brought together. Additionally, investing in training and research to enhance knowledge and build human capital, and strengthening planning, collaboration, information sharing, and policy designs across multiple internal and external stakeholders. Within the ideal crisis management architecture, therefore, there will be important roles for different actors and organizations. The government will assume primary responsibility for regulating environmental, coastal, and hazard management, health and safety standards, and to build codes for buildings and ensure that the practices of the sector are compliant. Hoteliers, the other element of the partnership, will have to consciously and deliberately accelerate the shift to more sustainable and environmentally friendly patterns of production, energy generation, consumption, and construction that balances the importance of environmental sustainability with the economic benefits of tourism. In other words, we have to see sustainability and resilience as part of the balance sheet and the profit motive. Greater collaboration is needed, therefore, between tourism agencies, training institutions, and universities to develop the competencies, qualification, and knowledge, and to create that base that enables tourism labor force, which is very critical, especially in areas that will increasingly define the future of tourism. So that there has to be a re-architecturing of the labor market system within our tourism space to enable a stronger and more effective contribution of the human capital to the development of the industry. The private sector, through financial institutions and insurance companies in particular, will, I think, assume a critical supportive role in terms of increasing access to capital and credit to finance the transitioning of hotels to sustainability. Providing, I think, travel insurance coverage, this is one critical area, and parametric insurance schemes to protect visitors from travel-related risks, and to provide first response financial relief for destinations that are hit by natural disaster. I referenced that earlier by way of my comment about the Resilience Fund. The scientific and technological communities, I think, will be required to conduct pioneering and breakthrough research and develop innovations and technological solutions. Ultimately, therefore, as the global tourism sector looks to the future and rethinks tourism, the notion of a sustainable and resilient tourism sector warrants that the new look tourism industry harmonizes with the environment, promotes the safeguarding of cultural and natural heritage, protects livelihoods, benefit local communities, while responding to the changing expectations of sustainable behaviors and cultures by all tourism stakeholders. I think that this is a critical moment for us to consider a more global approach, and that indeed the call is timely, as was given by our own Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, in his address to the United Nations a few days ago, when he made the point that Jamaica proposes to have officially designated February 17 every year as a Global Tourism Resilience Day. In his own words, and I quote, "This annual commemoration would serve to encourage a consistent examination of resilience building in the tourism industry in the face of persisting global disruptions to sustainable tourism and sustainable development." Unquote. We have been engaging countries across the world in our efforts to bolster resilience in global tourism, and we encourage the global community to work with us towards commemorating the first Global Tourism Resilience Day in 2023. I invite you all to join us. Join the myriad of tourism institutions across the world that have already embraced the idea of a Global Tourism Resilience Day. And let us all meet in Jamaica on the 17th of February, 2023. May today's discussions not only please and satisfy the need for a building of rigor and the strengthening of the quality of discourses around the two most important pillars that predicates our future: resilience and sustainability. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Bartlett, for your riveting and usually thought-provoking presentation. I would like to now invite Mr. Takamatsu, our first presenter. Mr. Takamatsu, who is the president of Tourism Resilience Japan, is no stranger to disaster risk reduction and tourism. For example, Mr. Takamatsu played an important role in the launch of Japan Tourism Marketing Co., and he has spent his whole life doing work on both crisis management, tourism, and risk reduction, disaster risk reduction, in which he has been focusing to ensure that the safety of the visitors and the business and that business continuity of travel and tourism is facilitated. He is currently a member of the UNWTO Tourism Barometer panel of tourism experts, as well as the UNDRR Arise, which is a private sector alliance for disaster risk societies. And he's also a member of the expert committee for the World City Tourism Federation, and he currently serves as a visiting professor at the University of Tokyo and International Tourism Management at Tokyo University. As you can see, he is quite knowledgeable on this topic, and he has focused a lot on it. And the floor is yours, sir.
Well, good morning and good evening, people in Jamaica. And thank you very much, Dr. Walla, for such a fantastic introduction of me, a little bit more than what I'm actually am. And I really want to thank, firstly, to Minister Bartlett and Ambassador Richards for inviting me to this great opportunity to speak about the tourism resilience and crisis management. Next slide, please. Okay, to start with, of course, the people are here quite aware of what resilience and crisis management are, but thinking of the general audience who may not be so familiar with this concept, I start with the sharing the definition of resilience and crisis management. As you see in the slides, the resilience, according to Cambridge Business English Dictionary, says the quality of being able to return quickly to a previous good condition after problems, which just Minister repeatedly pointed out. And also, this center is a crisis management center as well. And crisis management, according to the same dictionary, says the actions that are taken to deal with emergency or a difficult situation in an organized way. So when we think about the resilience and crisis management, we have to look at both ways, the resilience and crisis management. Next slide, please. Why? Why do we have to think about and be prepared for the resilience and crisis management? One of the reasons, of course, is the tourism is an economic generator worldwide, and especially in the Caribbean island. And even globally, the sector contributes to 10.4% of the global GDP in 2019, which was a pre-pandemic year. And it supports 1 out of 10 jobs in the world, accounting for 330 million worldwide. And more than that, 1 out of 5 jobs were generated by tourism sector during the last 5 years. So it is the fastest growing industry sector. And on the other side, the minister, just as Minister also pointed out, the tourism is so prone and vulnerable to crisis. And for this reason, safety of the destination is a priority in selecting the holiday destinations for the tourist. That's one reason. And destinations and tourism businesses are responsible for ensuring safety of the visitors when there is the emergency takes place. And lastly, and finally, rapid post-disaster recovery significantly contributes to the recovery of the community as a whole, not only limited to what we call tourism sector, but also the entire society and community. So for these reasons, tourism resilience is so important. And here again, just the minister pointed out, and there are so many different kinds of disaster crisis risks that impact the tourism sector, including natural disaster risks, human-induced disaster risk, and health hazard risk. And in addition to that, when all these kind of the hazards takes place, there's always what we call perception and reputation crisis risks. People tend to think that, oh, this destination is impacted by a disaster, so maybe we can change the destination for the next holiday, or maybe we should wait for another year or two to go to that destination, where even this particular destination is back to normal at that time. That is called reputation crisis or perception crisis. Next, please. So this is just a brief what we have to do in tourism crisis management in just one. And in the middle, there is a crisis incident. And there are things that we need to do before pre-incident phases, including reduction of the risks and readiness for quick and appropriate response. And that is followed by the recovery of the destination after the disaster. Next, please. And when you think about the resilience and crisis management, for the very first step is to identify risks and impact. If you fail to identify major risks, what we call the unexpected takes place. And if there is something unexpected takes place, we are at a loss what to do, and maybe not be able to respond quickly and appropriately. Therefore, the first thing in tourism resilience and crisis management is identifying the risks and impacts induced by the crisis. And then once they are identified and analyzed, the next stage is proactively plan countermeasures and mitigation of the expected risks and impacts. Okay, we have the plan now. But even though the comprehensive risk management plan with 200 pages in a booklet means nothing unless there is a preparing for appropriate and appropriate response to the crisis risk and ensure visitor safety and rapid recovery of impacted tourist business and destination. Next slide, please. And this is the very rough timeline of the crisis disaster in tourism, starting with the pre-incident phase all the way down to the recovery. So just as I have discussed earlier, there are a couple, lots of things to be done before and at the onset of the disaster and after the disaster until the recovery. And I divided this chart into two vertical lines, which was what we need to do to ensure the safety of the visitors and relief of their concerns and anxiety on the left-hand side. And on right-hand side, business continuity and recovery of the tourism-related businesses and also the destination communities. So especially from the tourism business perspective, we have to look at both sides. Safety of the visitors, the confidence of the visitors. On the other hand, we need to go on our business even if we experience the emergency. Next, please. So right here on the other pink shows what we do for the visitor safety, and on the right hand side is the business continuity. And when you look at the circle, I mean a square on your left hand side for the visitor safety relief, it is very limited in time. It takes only for a few days after the incident takes place. You have to really concentrate in ensuring safety after maybe few days after the incident, and then the visitors will not be there anymore. They will return home safely, and if they are, return home safely, the activity for the visitor safety is done, complete. Then, or there's the long mission of continuing your business and recovery of the destinations as well as your business operation. Next slide, please. And as I first said, it's critically important to identify the risks and impacts to the visitors. For example, when you take an example of earthquake, there are lots of risks, takes place, like maybe the buildings collapse, or something falls from the window, broken, glasses, and then the impact to the visitors are injuries and, well, sometimes death. And the earthquake takes place, and there is a continuous aftershocks, and it's really terrifies and concerns of the safety of the visitors. And when there is an earthquake, most of the times where there's a major earthquake, there's the power failure, no electricity. And this has significant impact to the visitors there, because we lose the lighting, we lose air conditioning, loss of the water supply. When you think about it, even though there's this water supply in buildings, in hotels, they use electricity to pump up the water on to the tank at the top of the building. But this, the pump works on electricity power. So if there is a loss of the electricity, no water, that means no shower, no toilet, and elevator operation, of course, suspended. And worst thing is, when there is no power, we don't have power to charge these devices, meaning we're kind of shut down from the information without this device nowadays. And another impact, major impact to the visitors are suspension of transportation services. Take earthquakes, for example. The trains, buses, they stop operation. They suspend operation for quite a long period of time. And visitors cannot, travel to other places, cannot return if they are terrified in the destination where the earthquake hits. And in addition to that, there will be a restriction on making calls, because there are too many calls and mixes up the telecommunication system, and they just shut down all the outgoing calls. So there's a big impact on the communication, meaning collecting, getting the information about the disaster or situation, and also communicating to your families and the people concerned that you are safe or whatever is happening. Next slide, please. and visitors, no matter what the emergency is. These are general concerns. So these are not critical risks for the safety of the lives, but still, they're very much concerned and anxious about what's going to happen to me. Like, how can I ensure my safety? What do I have to do to stay safe? Or what about the safety of my family who are just out there, or how to travel home and onward? And I couldn't get enough information, especially in our own language. And lastly, where can I get food and water? Next slide. Next slide. So in order to minimize those impacts or relieve the concerns, there are lots of things that the tourism operators can do before and after the incident or onset of the disaster. For example, in case of maybe earthquakes just strike unexpectedly, but think about the hurricanes. You know that hurricanes are, approaching in a few days before. So during that time, maybe you can provide the emergency alert to the visitors there or those who are planning to come over to return home earlier than planned, or maybe wait until the hurricane is over, or you can also eliminate the risk factors that may have the major impact to the visitors, like taking out some of the things that may be blown out from the wind gust by the hurricane, so that they won't hit the visitors there. Or at the onset of the disaster, of course, you can make a safety instruction to the visitors and clients there, and lead them to shelter for evacuation or something. And after the first shock of the disaster, you can provide information on the situation and provide shelter for the visitors. And you also need to support their communication, both getting the information and also outgoing communication like telephones. And finally, when the situation is settled, you do want to assist the visitors go home. So these are the things that are really highly expected to the businesses at the front when they experience their major disasters and crises. And the impact to tourism business, these are mostly business continuity risks for the business continuity. Maybe there is physical damages on the properties, buildings, whatever. Then they have to suspend their business operation. And maybe when there is the information of the disaster taking place one destination, there will be there will be a cancellation of the booking. Just a huge number of the cancellation coming in, and after the crisis, there will be sharp decline of the visitors that we have just experienced over the last few years, and that will end up with the significant decline of revenue and operational losses of the businesses. Next slide, please. Therefore, there are a lot of things that the tourism business can do to mitigate the impact of the crisis to their business operation. And especially, really have to think, just as the minister mentioned, financing is the key to the business operation, you know. Even if there's no physical damage to their properties or whatever, there is a sharp decline of the clients and revenue. That means you'll be out of the cash flow. So immediately after the disaster event, the number one thing of the management of the tourism business have to do is securing working capital, money to continue running the operation. And also, another very, very important thing is to secure the employment of your people. Because the tourism businesses are nearly 100% dependent on the works of the employees, the services they generate, they provide. So when after the crisis, if the employees have the concern, well, am I going to, can I stay with this organization and this company, and maybe I will lose jobs or something? And without those concerns, they are very likely to leave their jobs. And after the recovery, even the properties and facilities are back to normal. There's no one to serve the clients. So securing the employment is another very, very important factor for business continuity. Next slide, please. And in order to ensure prompt and appropriate response immediately following a crisis event, we need crisis management plan with manuals and business continuity plan, we call BCP. And with that, we need to have education and training and drills to your organization, employees and staff. A few years ago, I had a very good conversation with the risk management manager of the Qantas. And what he told me was very impressive. We have many thousands of different manuals, and our crew just learn everything here in the brain. They read and understand what they have to do, but we're not satisfied with that. We train the crew until the muscles learn. That's the most impressive word I heard from the Qantas guy. And it's very true. And do you know that Qantas has been regarded as the safest airline in the world for the last more than 10 years? That's a secret behind this. They train the crew until the muscles learn, not just the brain. And being ready involves more than making plans and running an occasional drill, says the PATA, and readiness nips potential crisis in the bud. Next slide. And finally, the recovery. PATA also says that returning to organization to normal after a crisis, and have visitors returning to crisis-affected destinations as quickly as possible. So post-crisis recovery includes infrastructure, supply chain line, and transportation back to normal, and tourism service operation back to normal. So these are hardware and also software of the operation back to normal, and perception and reputation of the affected destination. This is also very important, as I said earlier. And visit traffic and tourism revenue. And next slide, please. And the key to the tourism recovery marketing is communicate to the market that the affected destination is back to normal and safe, and today may be healthy. And also another communication is that visitors are already back enjoying tourism as much as they did before the incident. To show them, tell the rest of the world that we already have the tourists back here and they are really enjoying this destination. And share what the actual visitors feel about the affected destinations after incident to the potential visitors with concerns to this. There are lots of people who tend to think that, oh, can I go there? Can I go to Jamaica after the incident? And show them that already people here, we have visitors enjoying themselves. And that really relieve the potential, the concerns of the potential visitors. And lastly, priority segments are repeat visitors and fans of the affected destinations because they are the quickest to return. They are more likely to come back to support the recovery of the destination that they love. Next, please. Oh, maybe this is the end of, oh, yep. And in a tourism recovery marketing, first target the market in segments that are more likely to visit the affected destinations. And once the visitors begin to return, gradually expand the marketing activity to the rest of the world, other markets. So today I kind of concentrated on the crisis, the resilience and crisis management of the tourism businesses, and maybe my colleagues, two other colleagues on the panel, will make some remarks on the resilience and crisis management as a destination. Thank you very much.
Mr. Nakamura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Honorable Bartlett, Her Excellency Ambassador Richard, friends of GTRCMC, headed by Professor Waller, distinguished panelists, Mr. Takamatsu and Mr. Isa, participants, and the audience of the seminar. Good evening from Barbados, West Indies. My name is Hayato Nakamura. Thank you very much for the introduction, Professor Waller. And as he mentioned, I'm working here in Caribbean region, Barbados, as a disaster risk reduction DRR expert from JICA for CDMA, Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, which is a Caribbean community institute to cover DRR matters here in the Caribbean region. And Jamaica is one of the very important participating states for CDMA system. While Mr. Takamatsu discussed tourism crisis management based on his experience and the knowledge with on the tourism sector and private sector, I will try to brainstorm about DRR, disaster risk reduction, and tourism based on JICA's experience or my experience on DRR in Japan and Asia in order to consider the DRR for tourism in small island developing states, particularly the Caribbean region. Next slide, please. Okay. I believe that those of you in Japan already know about JICA, but JICA is implementing official development assistance, ODA of Japan, with the scheme of granted, yen loan, technical cooperation, and other various schemes, including the dispatch of experts. So that I'm one of them. Under the JICA's vision, leading the world with trust, And trust derives from, of course, Japan's economic and social development experiences, as well as mutual understandings with our partner countries such as Jamaica. And we have implemented various projects from hard to soft. Hard infrastructure includes such as the underground railway in Istanbul in Turkey, the international terminal of Hanoi Noi Bai Airport in Vietnam, and the flood control facilities in Metro Manila, Philippines. Next slide. Sorry, not before that. And while we are covering the 150 countries in the world, the Caribbean region, JICA has offices in St. Lucia, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Belize, Haiti, and I missed here on the slides, but we also have an office in Cuba, La Habana. We're waiting for the arrival of the tropical storm Yang at this moment. Next, please. DR, disaster risk reduction, is one of the important areas that we are working on the ODA works. As Japan itself implementing various disaster risk reduction works within our country historically. Japan has hosted all world conferences so far on DRR, namely Yokohama, Kobe, and Sendai. But the most important thing is that DRR in the Japanese language literally says prevention and mitigation, which is pre-disaster action. So our works focus more on pre-disaster action while we try to comprehensively the DR process as a whole. Next, please. Thinking about the nature of DR works, DR contributes to economic development by minimizing potential losses as shown in the figure. So that for those who are working in the private sector, DR seems not so fun compared to the measures to expand the gains by marketing. But it is not the cost, but rather the investment in order to sustain the business. Next, please. If I explain about DR cycle from the point of view from the public and the DR sector, there is a slight difference, but an important difference from what was explained by Mr. Takamatsu. Crisis management in the private sector started with the crisis management plan, BCP, and awareness, as stated so far. But from the public sector point of view, it is very important to reduce the risk tangibly. So that making sure about the target risk, such as floods, landslides, and through the thorough risk assessment, and we try to mitigate or reduce the risk with various ways, such as flood control or other infrastructure. Then relevant readiness or preparedness, response, and the recovery action may be implemented. When recovery, adding to the back to the normal, as which was explained by Mr. Takamatsu. But we also echo build back better, as Ambassador mentioned in the opening statement, so that we do not have losses with similar hazards in the future. So that is the part probably the reputation management for the tourism sector, I believe. Please note that the flood control of Montego Bay, which is one of the Jamaican tourism destinations, was implemented under Japan's ODA in 20 years ago. And I hope that it supports the tourism business in Jamaica at this moment. Next, please. Disaster risk reduction is not only to do big projects like flood control or there is stoppage or construction whatsoever, but avoiding hazard risk is very important factor for the businesses. For instance, the updated City Planning Act of Japan urges the relocation of the hotels from the disaster warning areas, as shown in the slide. Of course, I understand that it's very, very hard decision or hard measures for each businesses, but it's very important that to make tangible actions for disaster risk reduction. Next, please. And thinking about the tourism in the Caribbean region, coastal hazards are one of the most impacted matters. So coastal management is essential for the region. Taking a nature-based solution such as mangrove planting or civil works intervention, at least like it's important to seek better solutions based upon the local condition. Next, please. Conservation destination should be not limited to the beach, but the cultural heritage is also important. DRR of cultural heritage is not prioritized in terms of humanitarian relief alone, but it is critical for spiritual and, of course, tourism recovery. And I understand that UNESCO is echoing the DRR of cultural heritage in the international community. In Japan, based upon the fire case in the past, January 26th is set as the day of fire prevention of cultural heritage. Next, please. Well, Mr. Takamatsu touched on business continuity planning, but from the public sector point of view, safe and resilient infrastructure, such as logistic infrastructure, is crucial. And the resiliency of those infra facilities, including operation and maintenance, should not be compromised for the public investment. Next, please. So so far, the discussion, what I have made, seems like from the business sector point of view, so that it feels a bit far. However, I think we can make new value through DRR and the tourism with the synergy effect. For example, in the recovery process, so that it's a build back better process in the of the Tohoku region, people found unique value in the locality through fishery and agriculture products, which are utilized for tourism opportunities. Besides, a learning tour on tsunamis with storytellers can attract school trips and even the JICA-based training as well. Next, please. Considering about St. Vincent and the Grenadines of the Caribbean region, or some other volcanic small island states, which sometimes we're having a volcanic eruption. St. Vincent and Grenadines the last year. So that I can highlight the example of the Toya Usu Geopark in Hokkaido, which erupted in the year of 2000. After the eruption, they conserved the remaining ruins, the damaged hospital, and the housing units as an eco museum. Then in 2009, they registered the area as UNESCO Global Geoparks. Along with such conservation, they fostered local specialists as volcano Meister. Meister is a German word, so that it's like a specialist who can guide visitors and also implement DRR education as well as crisis management during the emergency time, so that they add the value of safety and safer destination. Next, please. In order to tackle emerging DRR issues in the tourism sector, enhancing innovation, which was also already explained by the minister, is also quite important as a catalyst for making synergy effects between the two sectors. This is the example of the preparedness of the shelter in one of the labs of my university, Nagoya Institute of Technology, but it's done by other professor, Professor Kitagawa, who is a designer, architectural designer, has developed a methodology to build a durable house as an instant house, so that it takes only 1 hour to build a house. And it was considered to arrange the shelter during the emergency time. But it can be used as a glamping or COVID-19 physical distancing booth or advertisement materials. So that's one of the innovations at the moment. Next, please. Lastly, I would like to emphasize the importance of a regional coalition. Tohoku examples shows that while the tsunami affected area was quite limited in the region, the tourism recovery or tourism promotion was implemented under the name of Tohoku region. And I myself joined one of the events, and I could find the various unique features during the marathon. Sorry that I didn't put the scenery of the water station or food station because I was running, but the food that I put there at the goal point, and they served sake and Japanese rice wine or various foods as well. But not only there, but in the water station, instead of water station, so that they provide the foods for various areas anyway. The next slide and the last slide. As a summary, as a part of the brainstorming so that in DRR and tourism, so that I mentioned the investment. Investing DRR prior to the disaster event is very important. Even taking a bit longer term, but it is very crucial to invest tangibly. Then DRR plus tourism make new value. Lastly, I have emphasized the importance of the regional coalition or cooperation in the process of the gaining resiliency. I am looking forward to discussing DRR for tourism resiliency further in the panel. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, sir, for that very solutions-based presentation, specifically focusing on the dynamics that businesses, tourism businesses in small and developing states, particularly those in the Caribbean, and you are very clear that you are familiar with the challenges in the Caribbean that they face. Many of these countries, as you know, are tourism dependent for their economic prosperity, but at the same time have to balance that prosperity with their immediate and their global environments. And it was very interesting that you highlighted and drew attention to the importance of investments as a mechanism to try to see how best to raise the necessary resources to be able to and focus specifically on the issues of trying to ensure that balance. So thanks. It was quite a very thought-provoking and interesting presentation, and I'm looking forward myself to some of the questions that may arise from the presentation. Our next speaker is Mr. Rajiv Isar, who is a policy specialist in disaster risk reduction and recovery for resilience building, and his other areas of expertise covers disaster and climate risk governance, urban risk management and resilience, local and community risk management, mainstreaming risk and development. Rajiv has around 20 years of experience of working on disaster and climate risk related issues at various levels, global, regional, national, local. And he has worked with institutions such as the Rockefeller Foundation and the Executive Office for the United Nations Secretary General. He currently works at the United Nations Development Program, where he leads the thematic practice on urban and community resilience within UNDP Global Disaster Risk Reduction Team. Mr. Isar, your presentation is now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Honorable Minister, Mr. Bartlett, Her Excellency Ambassador Richards, esteemed fellow panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for this opportunity to join you today to deliberate upon an issue connected to building the resilience of a key sector of our socioeconomic life, and which for many countries constitutes their economic mainstay, or even as a major contributor to their GDP. My distinguished panelists have already articulated many important perspectives, and I would like to carry forward the conversation by focusing a bit more on the changing risk landscapes, the imperatives of building the resilience in this context, and how risk resilience work has a close interface with sustainable development, especially in the tourism sector, and some actionable ideas that we can take forward from this discussion today to be further explored and elaborated upon as we move towards on this journey towards making our tourism sector more resilient towards different shocks and stresses over a period of time. Next slide, please. My previous speakers and the opening remarks have also, articulated a number of challenges that we are, facing today. In a bit of a snapshot, if we look at IPCC's assessment report 6, it clearly tells us that SIDS economies and their socioeconomic resilience is likely to come under severe strain due to disaster and climate risks. And these are further, compounded by the typical geography of the SIDS, the narrow economic base, and the high exposure, which makes them 35% more vulnerable as compared to other countries. If we look at the past history, on an average, one disaster event causes a loss of nearly 14% of the GDP of an impacted island state, and affects nearly 11% of its population directly. So not taking into account the indirectly impacted, but just the directly impacted segment of their population. It is estimated that the cost of climate change in the Caribbean itself is likely to be $10.7 billion by 2025 and $21.9 billion by 2050, which is nearly 5 as of 2025, or 10.3% of the collective GDP of the entire region. So that's the kind of challenge that we are contending with. Of the total disaster-related support to the SIDS during 1999 to 2010, it is worth noting that only 10% has gone towards prevention and preparedness. But at the same time, this vulnerability to disaster climate risks, in fact, goes much beyond that. It covers a number of socioeconomic sectors, environment, livelihoods, inclusion, and a number of other aspects of their day-to-day lives and livelihoods too. Next, please. So what is the existing and the emerging risk landscape that we are dealing with, and how is this important risk development nexus that we need to take into account? We are already witnessing that there is a shifting risk attributes today. They are no longer standalone or linear. It is more multidimensional, more intersecting kind of risks, which have systemic cascading impacts across number of sectors and stakeholders. We are traditionally oriented towards looking at risks to development. So there is a development infrastructure, there is a housing, or there is something else that is exposed to, or say vulnerable to one or the other hazard, and we try to mitigated, to build our, capacities to prepare, to respond, etc. But at the same time, now we need to also look at the risks emanating from development. Because if we look at our different socioeconomic sectors today, the development choices and the decisions that we make today are the ones which are generating newer sort of risks, or are trying to reshape and exacerbate the existing ones. So our risk management approaches need to take into account not just the risks too, but also the risks from development. If we look at our recent experiences, then we see that the scenario today is that there are shared risks and shared, these vulnerabilities. There is a similar set of risk drivers, which are underlying all risk typologies. So whether we talk of, hazard exposures, climate at risk, conflict, fragility, or some of the other, socioeconomic challenges, as exemplified by the pandemic. So all this tells us that we need to better understand and assess the existing patterns of our exposure and vulnerability. There are certain pre-existing conditions that are common to these multiple typologies of risk, and we need to assess and understand them better to be able to devise appropriate strategies to address them. Next, please. So there has been a bit of a discussion on what constitutes a resilience. There is a UN Chief Executive's Board, and there is, understanding of a resilience, which has been defined as, sort of an ability. So there's an emphasis on the ability, part of that. Ability of individuals, sectors, communities, societies, nations, etc., to prevent, resist, absorb, adapt, respond, and recover. So positively, efficiently, and effectively, without compromising long-term sustainable development objectives. So that, there is a process and there is a journey towards a resilience, and it has an end, objective, which should lead to a sustainable development, realization. There are certain elements, which have been identified. So that is understanding the risk context. That was, what I was talking about in the previous slide. The system interconnections. How is one, system or a sector, next to the other? And what are these linkages, which tend to exacerbate the impacts over, a period of time? What are those sectors and stakeholders that need to be brought into this conversation? And what are the kind of the capacities needed to build a resilience? So the capacities identified for building the resilience are preventive, anticipative, absorptive, adaptive, and transformative. And all of these need to be backed up by some sort of resources. And it's not just financial. It can be technical, it can be knowledge, it can be research, it can be the ability to cope, to respond, and bounce back. So all these elements together, and these capacities together, build the ability of a system, of an individual, of a sector, a community, or a nation to move forward on a sort of a resilience pathway. This approach has been outlined in the UN Common Guidance on helping build resilient societies. Much more details and examples where this approach is applicable to different challenges, different sort of a risk context, etc. Next slide, please. Drawing inspiration there, from our DRR and the recovery, practice has 5 thematic areas that we try to focus on and, contribute towards building the resilience. One is the actionable risk information. So that was the first thing. What are those, analysis of data? What are the risk, context, damage and loss accounting system, the Sendai framework monitoring? How are we moving towards that? So what kind of risk information can be shared with different sectors and stakeholders so that they can imbibe them and integrate into their development planning, etc. Second is the disaster and climate risk governance. So when we are speaking about governance of a risk, so it's not just the elements, that's the laws, the policies, the strategies, etc., that we definitely develop, but also at the same time, how are these different elements operationalized? How is there some sort of a coordination between different sectors and stakeholders, and how is this informing and influencing a development decision making? So that's important, that that information needs to be translated into a well-informed development decision. Third is the early warning systems and preparedness. Many of us are familiar, and I will not explain these much more. Fourth is the resilient recovery, the ability to bounce back, assess the kind of damages and those losses that have been inflicted by a particular risk or a sort of a disaster event, and what best can be done to recover there from, not just build back better, but build back forward, looking towards the emerging challenges also. And the last bit is the urban and the local action that speaks about the bottom-up sort of a resilience building approach, where we engage the communities, the urban and the local authorities to contribute towards a resilience building efforts. Next slide, please. Informed thereby and looking at these risks and the resilience nexus with development, a risk-informed development approach has been developed, which again speaks about a five-pronged approach towards that. And the first part is supporting the evidence base. Why should a sector, a government, a private entity, or some other individual also invest in a risk reduction measure? So there has to be an empirical evidence. What is that cost-benefit analysis that goes into it? So that sort of an assessment and analysis need to be made available to different sectors, stakeholders, be it individuals also, so that they make well-informed choices and decisions, when it comes to either their livelihoods or the development decisions that they make on a day-to-day basis. Second is supporting risk-informed policy. Now, there has to be a sort of a policy linkage or a policy coherence that we speak about. None of our sectors are standalone. Whether we talk of a DRM policy or a tourism development policy, it has to be connected to a number of other sectors and those policies. So those policies have to have that interface. There has to be an objective, which is common across these different policies. So supporting that is another, element of this approach. Third is supporting risk-informed implementation. How are we able to do some programs, development planning, development programs to implement that? What are the kind of capacities that are needed for implementation? What is the kind of the responsibilities and sort of coordination that is needed to ensure that there is effective implementation of a decision that has been made? Fourth is fostering sustainable finance. So there's very important that this has to be based on, what we say, a public expenditure review. What is the risk-informed, integrated national financing framework? Sort of an economic modeling that can be done to inform that what are the kind of resources needed to move towards this risk-informed development trajectory. What are the, how are we able to mobilize these resources? And it will just not external assistance. It can also be, augmenting the domestic revenue streams at the same time. And lastly is to ensure that this risk-informed development approach is people-centered and stakeholder-driven. It's not just that some administrative entity takes a decision about that, but at the end, it has to be localized. It has to be institutionalized at the local level to ensure that nobody is left behind on this journey. So in a sense, that risk reduction needs to become a normal part of development and economic activity, more integrated into it and mutually reinforcing sort of approaches as opposed to standalone risk reduction, work that we normally might be attuned towards doing. Next slide, please. So specifically coming to the tourism sector, many of us have already spoken about it, but just to recap a bit more, that tourism has been among the most affected sectors of economy worldwide during COVID-19. Speaking at a global level, there has been about a 44% decline in tourist arrivals in SIDS in 2020, and this was much higher in the Caribbean, going up to 67%. In 2021, the SIDS suffered an estimated 70% decline in the travel-related revenues, which were generated as the tourist inflows declined between 60 to percent. This has high socio-economic implications beyond the tourism sector too, as nearly more than half of the force employed in this sector is women. So there's a household impact, and there's a family impact that we definitely need to take into account. And this decline in the revenues and the development investment is also, leading to lesser, investments in a resilience, building. If we do not have those revenues available, then you will not be able to have the resources to invest into that. And this is the more important because now we know that risks are, having a prolonged impact and a slower sort of a recovery, process. There are numerous examples. COVID has told us the ongoing, climate emergency and many of the prolonged, crises in terms of conflict, war, etc., that we see around us, and all of these, compel us to have a relook at these risk attributes and how they tend to play, say with each other. Next, please. Now, taking into account Ambassador Richard's exhortation in the beginning that we need to have, some sort of an action-oriented dialogue, there are, certain ideas that we might take into account or analyze and explore more if we have to move towards building the resilience in the tourism sector. The sector needs to place resilience and sustainability at the heart of the business strategy. It should not just be, giving a tourist, product. It is more about how are we able to ensure these, qualities at the same time. Integrated risk analysis and resilience diagnostics. We need to re-evaluate the risk context, maybe using DRR or climate change as the entry points, simply because there is more data, there is more evidence available as the DRR practice has over the past decades been able to build number of disaster damage and loss data fields, etc., which help us to understand the effects of these risks on tourism assets and the vice versa. So what we were speaking about in terms of risks to and risks from development. So it's not just the impacts on tourism assets, but at the same time how tourism assets tend to exacerbate some of these challenges that we face. We also need to reorient investments in DRR and sort of a resilience building. As I mentioned in the previous slide, that over a decade and more, from 1999 to 2010, only 10% of the assistance spent towards prevention. So we need to increase that, and it should not just be a response-centric assistance from either the international community or the outside development partners. We need to have more preparedness capacity. This has already been emphasized by my fellow panelists, and it's likely based on the experience during the COVID pandemic itself that the next generation of tourists might be more demanding in terms of what are the safety protocols there, because COVID-19 was not just a health emergency; it had various other impacts. So tomorrow's tourists, they might demand whether the services or the tourism providers are they able to give me a different sort of a safety feel? Because when we speak about tourism, it's an experience. So what is the experience that's being offered to a visitor, and what is impelling him or her to spend more time in a tourist destination as opposed to the other? So keeping these demands in mind, there is definitely a need to invest more into building the capacities of our tourism professionals itself who are into this industry too. Integrate all resilience dimensions. We normally, tend to focus a bit more on the physical or the built environment and tend to ignore the socioeconomic, the environmental, and the governance aspects. But if we are speaking in terms of building the resilience, then I think all these four, dimensions need to come together. We also need to reconfigure the ODA paradigm. Currently, it is pegged to the income levels of the countries, but I think there is a time now to move towards a multi-dimensional sort of a vulnerability index. More vulnerable a sector or a country or a community is, the more support or assistance should be extended towards that, and not just based on the income levels of those countries. Next slide, please. We need to do development differently. So as I already mentioned, our development choices are today reshaping some of these challenges and these disasters that we are witnessing. So we need to move towards a risk-informed development, diversification of our socioeconomic assets, building more towards a knowledge economy. Our planning and the budgeting also needs to factor in the upstream, downstream, and intersectoral linkages. So how can, say, we have a tourism policy which does not take into account the water management or governance or the energy or food security, or how can we have a food security policy which does not connect to tourism or say water? So all these interlinkages across sectoral, what we are talking about in terms of a policy coherence also need to be factored into. Reorient the tourism offer. Honorable Minister was talking about the theme of rethink tourism. I think that's where this point clearly sets in. We need to look beyond the traditional notions towards and move more towards a risk-aware, nature and climate-friendly, equitable tourist destination. Are we oriented more towards a mass, low-end tourism products, or towards lighter, high-end touristic experience? So from an infrastructure centered towards more nature and people centered tourism might be an approach that we need to look at. More improved policy and planning connect. So risk-informed tourism infrastructure, which also needs to be complemented by holistic tourism development plan. So the balance between sort of coastal experience or sun and sand sort of experience that are normally advertised vis-a-vis the carrying capacity of that particular coastline. Just mass tourism vis-a-vis sustainable. So some of these choices that we have to make and move forward towards that. Lastly, we have to make resilience building and risk reduction everybody's business. We need to take the risk and risk management out of the administrative domains. It's normally, our thinking is that this is something for the government entities to do. We need to move out of that, engage the private sector, the technical academic institutions, communities to work more on climate change and DRR work. There has been a detailed work done on the resilience building in the tourism sector in this newsletter. The link is here in this. And with that, I would like to end my presentation and look forward to an interactive discussion. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Isar, for foregrounding the risk moment in disaster risk reduction. It is a variable which, to be quite frank, I don't think has been thoroughly ventilated, not only with regard to issues of disaster risk reduction or sustainable development or climate change, but certainly in tourism resilience, which is an emerging element of an emerging moment of the tourism space. What I personally took from your presentation was the importance of the interconnectedness of risk, understanding the interconnectedness of risk, understanding stakeholders and their capacities, the importance of governance in connection to this disaster risk reduction, looking at issues of controls and coordinations and the different elements that impact on decision making, but more importantly, data analytics as an element of informed decision making in supporting policies. To be quite frank, and thank you for your presentation, excellent. All three presentations, in my esteem, are all moments that are synergetic, and I could possibly even go further and say that based on the presentations that they all converge. And at that point of conversion, we recognize that the solutions, are emerging, and I have them here as capacity building, investing in the future, partnerships and linkages, monitoring, raising awareness, a data-driven approach, and recognizing the importance of governance. And that's my personal takeaway from all of the different presentations that we had here today.
Perhaps I should make an attempt at this because we have had to manage uncertainties in our own navigation of this pandemic so far. And the issue of uncertainty is by its own definition leading you to iterations. It's a how do you do it? What is the basis on which you can make informed responses? What level of innovation is required in doing that? So we initially looked at the science, what the science said. We're guided by that. Then we're guided by what data said. And then what we do is to look at what the cultural and sociological space offers by way of traditional responses, because almost everything that happens to you has a little bit of history that is tied somewhere there. It is often said there's nothing new under the sun. What happens is how do you deal with those elements that happen to you? So I think managing uncertainty is pulling then on science. It's looking at data and what it offers, and then tradition and practices over time, and of course, innovation. So when you have information and data, how do you convert that to respond to the immediate practices, the immediate issues as they come before you? I think that that's as best as we could. In the process of doing that in Jamaica, we were able to establish protocols in relation to how to manage these things. Then out of that innovation, we brought in a resilient corridor, a geographical area that we defined to enable best practices to be applied in that space, the result of which was we had, in the case of the pandemic, an infection level that was 0.01%, which was significantly lower than the average within the communities. I think that perhaps that might offer some guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Bartlett. Mr. Issar, I think this one is for you. Could you kindly expand on your idea of switching to MDVI to guide ODA as opposed to the current practice of pegging eligibility for funding on a country's level of income? What would that MDVI look like from this perspective?
Thank you so much, Shar. And I would also like to add on to what the Honorable Minister said in response to the previous question too. When we do a risk analytics and a resilience diagnostics, we normally take into account sort of known risks. There will definitely be unknown sort of risks which might emerge as we move ahead. And unknown or uncertainties might also be not just how the risks emerge, but how they sort of play out in terms of their impacts, in terms of their sort of a cascading nature. So our analysis of known risks and our investments in mitigating them, our investments in building the capacities to prepare, to respond, to recover, also enable us to meet some of the unknown, ones which might arise. Taking a military adage here and trying to apply it, because it's an equally a major challenge, for us as communities. There is an adage used in the army trainings: the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. So if we do a sort of a more, futuristic thinking, a scenario, planning exercises, with the risk management and trying to see like how tomorrow's risk might unfold. What will I do if A scenario happens, and what will I do if scenario B, takes place? So that enables us to have the confidence or some sort of an ability to meet some of the unknown, ones. That's one. Second, our focus also needs to move towards reducing the exposure as much as we possibly can. And another point important, which I mentioned in my talk also, was about looking at the shared vulnerabilities. So when we are looking at that, many of those are common across different risks and might also be the ones which will be underlying the future unknown one. So that's another way to address those uncertainties. And thirdly, there is a phrase in the telecom industry, having some sort of a redundant bandwidth. So we also need to have that redundancy or that bandwidth to be able to manage and cope with some of those uncertainties. And thank you for this question on the MDVI. It has been a recent discussion which has been happening at the international level, because today, if we are talking in terms of exposure and the vulnerabilities, there are many developed countries, high income countries which are equally or more vulnerable than the other ones. Our international development assistance is today pegged to the income level of the countries. So LDCs, or low income countries, low and middle income countries, while vulnerabilities and our susceptibility to various challenges, to disasters, is not connected to the income level of a particular country or a community. There might be really developing or middle income or middle and high income countries, communities which might be equally susceptible, and many of the states are in that category itself. So should we continue to peg this international assistance to the income level, or move more towards what is the kind of challenge that particular country and a community is facing? And higher the challenge or higher the vulnerability, the more the need to extend the international support and assistance to that to manage it and mitigate it. So we're looking at, why does it say multi-dimensional? Multi-dimensional in the sense, because this, again, if we look at the resilience attributes, environmental, socioeconomic, poverty, marginalization, inequities, discrimination. So these are the factors which add to the vulnerability. So we need to take into account many of these, vulnerabilities and do the assessment. So attempt towards developing this sort of an index has been made. Some analysis and assessment is being done to further inform this debate. It is still a discussion. It is not a decision, but we definitely, knowing the challenges that we are contending with today, there might be a need to move towards this also, or to take it into consideration at a higher policy level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. We have one more question. Hold on. It's a very long question, so I'll try to see if I can summarize. It says here, for many countries, the tourism industry is a major economic driver. In the last decade, we have witnessed many disasters increasingly threatening popular touristic destinations. It is critical for the tourism sector to invest in preparedness and in disaster resilience. But do tourist interests demonstrate any interest in investing in DRR? Are there any best practices, and what are the main challenges faced with trying to get them to be interested in investing in DRR? Very long question, but I think it basically tries to ask to what extent are there best practices in tourist destinations, businesses, so to speak, investing in DRR, and if so, what are these best practices, and what are the challenges surrounding getting persons, businesses to invest in DRR? I think that's the basis of the question. It's an open question for anyone who wants to ask, respond. I think you're muted. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
Okay, this is Masato Takamatsu. Let me add a few things about your question. Well, for the visitors and tourist market, it's not easy to identify whether the destination, particular destination, has largely invested in DRR. But there are a lot of things that they can really see and feel confident about the safety of the destination by, for example, the early warning alert when there is the major disaster expected shortly in a multi languages, as I said in my presentation, the visitors who are experiencing disaster are at a loss what to do because of the lack of the information they can understand in their own languages. So this is one of the things. It's a very, very small investment or development, but still has a large impact on the building confidence to the visitors, and also the signage in the public space where they show the evacuation, shelter direction for the evacuation, or even in a destination like on a coastal resort, the signage to show the elevation for the sea level means a lot, because when there is a tsunami alarm, they know how high they are from the sea level, so that they can understand what where they should evacuate to the higher place, or they are still safe if the elevation is like 25 meters from the sea level, something like that. So likewise, for the entire community, maybe the investment on the resilience or the DRR is a huge amount of money, but in the tourism sector, there are lots of things that can be done in a very small amount of money, efforts, but still can give the confidence to the people who are visiting there. And then that's, I think, the characteristic of the tourism sector and our businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
I want to add something,
Please,
if I may. From the point of view that the question, I think, is born out of experience, that there isn't enough being done, and that's true. So this process of reimagining tourism, as we are trying to do now, should inform a new perspective on building DRR. And the public sector and private sector have to work together on this. In the case of my own experience in Jamaica, we have established a policy in relation to destination assurance. And that whole policy takes into account all of these critical elements that are now have to come together to create the synergies that enable safety, security, and seamlessness in the destination. And I think that it's a whole new ball game that is emerging. I think that the private sector is realizing that a critical part of their profit motive has to be resilience building. And they're doing that now far more in terms of not just building and the quality and the integrity of construction and the type of designs, but they're also paying a greater attention to environmental ecosystems and social ecosystems. So there is a greater involvement in the communities that are around. The social responsibility framework is strengthening. So I hear the question very well. I feel the pain of it, because I know that it is true that enough attention has not been paid to it. But what we want to do in this whole new process of reimagining, as we recover, let's try to recover properly, better, and stronger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Bartlett. We have time for one more question. Trying to choose which one of the questions to ask. What are some of the ways we can ensure that the interests of vulnerable stakeholders are included in risk planning processes? So let me go again. What are some of the ways that we can ensure that the interests of vulnerable stakeholders are included in risk planning processes? This is a question of governance and exclusion and inclusion.
Can I make some of the comments or answers?
Go ahead.
No, I'm simply just, the question so far is interrelated in some extent. I was thinking like it's more like the governance, risk monitoring or risk planning governance is very, very important. So the so the vulnerable people should be included in the process of the monitoring. So that also ensures the matters for account for uncertainty, of course, because it's not certain. That's why so that we try to monitor the situation whatsoever. So that for any matters, so that it's very, very important to see the governance, because risk reduction or resiliency matters, of course, the tourism, but in general for the DRR. We cover many sectors, so that even the UNDR's discussions, the breaking silos is one of the key for the arrangement. So the inclusion of the vulnerable peoples, so that will be the matter for the silos. So the tourism, social sectors or whatever, so that everywhere in any government or any, even the regional or international organizations, so that there is some kind of silos. And when we have a discussion on DR, even the last regional platform on the DR hosted by Jamaican government, so the breaking silos was one of the key elements. And at least like inclusion of the vulnerable peoples for the risk monitoring benefit a lot for tourism, of course, because we can ensure that any person can travel anytime for any matters. So that I think for the governance, focus on the governance is one of the key for the way to go forward. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takamatsu. I think we are now at the end of the program. We do have some more questions that were thrown out, but we promised to collate these questions and share them with the presenters and the other persons who are part of the presentation team, and try to see how best we can summarize the responses and post them on our social media pages and our website, so we can keep the conversation going, because it is a very critical and germane issue to the tourism space. It's very critical, and those last two questions in particular, and you're right, Mr. Takamatsu, that it spoke to issues of governance, primarily issues of inclusion and exclusion, and of course, for those of us who work in the development space, we recognize that this does happen, but we also acknowledge that it is a very disastrous thing, because it means that persons are excluded from the decision-making process, and decisions that are made may not be made in their interests. And we do know the dangers of such a paradigm, especially in dealing with such a critical development issue. Thank you, everyone, for the time, both online and in person, that you took to participate in our event today. It was actually a topic that I myself had some knowledge of, but did not understand the gravity of the critical issues that have emerged in this discussion, some of which have definitely contributed to myself, I needed to think about tourism and the tourism space, especially as it relates to issues of business continuity. And as we leave here today, permit me to use this opportunity to thank all of the persons who have been working behind. And I said earlier, I thanked Ambassador and her team in Japan, and here in Jamaica, we have a number of persons, Mr. Preston and his team, and in particular, Anna, our Director of Global Affairs, who has essentially been the rock and the driving force behind the Jamaica aspect of it. And of course, one can only imagine that having an event of this nature, starting 7:00 p.m. in Jamaica time and 9:00 in Asia time, and I think perhaps 10:00 for you, Mr. Isar, or a little later for you, Mr. Isar. But it does.
5 a.m.
5 a.m. So I had to bring up this to the presenters, because I'd also like to thank the presenters. It was an arduous task synchronizing all of these timelines together and getting persons to be up and speaking very coherently. about this subject matter. So thanks everyone for your contribution, and we look forward to seeing you in Jamaica on the 17th of February at our international conference on tourism resilience and sustainable development, at which we will launch Tourism Resilience Day. Thank you everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night from King.